I'm politically liberal, that like a lot of the people who work with fire are your average sort of mainstream Democrat doesn't necessarily believe this is really happening. And I didn't really understand it was really happening until I ended up being the guy who gets the fire cases.
The editors of alternative school papers understand it all too well because they're on the front lines. About 6 times a year, a dozen or so students at Yale spend hundreds of hours putting together a single issue of the Yale Free Press. Over the years, the Yale Free Press has been a target of systematic theft. Entire press runs have been repeatedly stolen from distribution points around campus, and to this day, the Yale administration has taken absolutely no action. Why would they be a target? And why won't Yale do anything to help?
We are conservative/libertarian monthly political publication.
We've published on some pretty controversial subjects, such as the unionization of the grad students.
And of course, all the open-minded people at Yale treated their views with courtesy and respect.
There were piles of 300, so that doesn't disappear overnight.
After it got stolen the first time, we reprinted it, put half out at first, kept half in my room.
It was stolen, put the other half out, it was stolen.
The previous issue was also stolen, and mysteriously enough, the most recent issue that we've put out is also missing.
The stolen papers cost the Yale Free Press thousands of dollars to print, but the Yale administration seemed uninterested.
They said that they might put a message out to the Yale community, but they never got to that for some reason.
They told us to take on the investigation.
We were also told not to try and victimize ourselves.
I've heard of thefts occurring on lots of other campuses of conservative papers.
The kind of problems that we've had pale in comparison to what happens on a regular basis at some other student papers like the Cal Patriot.
California Patriot is considered the conservative publication of UC Berkeley. It's affiliated with the Berkeley College Republicans.
The most popular way of distributing publications on campus is to leave them in certain designated publication areas, and every other publication does this. But when the Patriot was left there, we found that the stacks would disappear within minutes, and we weren't that popular.
We mainly distribute it in the main artery of campus, which is through Sproul Plaza and Sather Gate. The reason why we don't distribute it the way other papers do is because it either gets stolen or it gets vandalized.
A lot of the people that go to Berkeley actually might not have believed that conservatives existed there, and they are angry that they do. People don't like what you have to say, and they take it upon themselves to get rid of any information contrary to their views.
Well, why print it if it's simply going to be destroyed? No one's going to get it. So by handing it out, we can ensure that people do get it.
Someone stood out on Sproul Plaza, where we distribute by hand now, with a sign saying California racist and a big arrow, and stood out there with us all day long. So that was fun.
We get fascist and Nazis a lot, and Hitler Youth.
Last week, a guy came up to us with a bullhorn and told us the only good Republican is a dead Republican.
Andrea Irvin, our club president, they actually rammed her and tried to push her down.
The very first time Vanessa handed out the Patriot, she found out just how tolerant her fellow Berkeley students could be.
The woman approached me. She was clearly not too happy, but it was my first time passing it out, so I was excited. I come up to her, smile, and offer her a Cal Patriot. She blows her stack at that point and just hawks a loogie at me. There were 2 other times people attempted to spit on me that day, too. It was a bit shocking for me. I didn't expect spitting.
And political discrimination on campus isn't limited to just students. You remember Professor Freeberg. Now meet her husband, Roger. In many ways, the Freebergs seem like your typical American family. She teaches, he has a small local business, and they're the proud parents of 3 beautiful daughters. But they also have a horrible secret.
I'd been a member of the county's Republican Central Committee. It became noticed when I was involved in the recall that my last name and Laura's last name was the same.
I had a few people come into my office, kind of close the door behind them and say, well, please tell us this is a mixed marriage.
A lot of people were worried that maybe Laura was a closet Republican.
One colleague just really lost his temper and said, well, we never would have hired you if we'd known you're Republican.
In a little study we did, no one in the administration at Cal Poly is a Republican. No one in Laura's department is a Republican. I'm unaware of anyone in the School of Liberal Arts who's a Republican, except for Laura.
I was just very cautiously neutral since I wished to remain employed.
A lot of bad things happened. My house was attempted to be broken into, a swastika burnt on our lawn, and some really nasty threats to my children.
I was removed as department head of the psychology department, and things became very overtly hostile.
Now, what do you do when a person is doing their job by all objective measures beautifully? What if they get the highest student evaluations in the department?
Well, that's where you go after somebody, make them sufficiently uncomfortable.
She was isolated from the department.
They move your office around.
Must have been a moving man in a prior life because I moved her office 4 or 5 times.
They mess with your schedule.
The purpose of this harassment is to break you, to destroy you, to get you to quit.
Oh, it just went on and on and on and on and on.
This happened every day.
I wasn't being cooperative and quitting is the problem.
She had constant meetings with her deans, constant meetings with other people to talk about her problem.
We've had faculty arrested for child abuse and all kinds of terrible things, but I walk into a meeting and everyone has Freeburg files this thick. I made it very clear in writing. I said, I do not believe this is based on my performance. I do believe it's based on bias, and guess what? I'm going to look for legal remedies.
Finally went to federal court.
People during my case who would rush up to me, look either way, is anyone seeing me, talk to you? By the way, I really support what you're doing, but for God's sake, don't tell anyone I said so or I'm dead. My students, in fact, after all of this blew up, were not at all surprised. They said, we knew you were a Republican, and I was, why? What am I doing? I'm talking about neurons. How can you tell I'm a Republican? The answer I got back was because of what you don't say. That they're so used to coming into every classroom, and before class starts, there's this introduction about current events, about today's newspaper, where the professor would be taking an opportunity to express political views. And of course, I never did that.
Now, this case has been settled to her favor, and she's not going to be talking about it. But let's just say that they were not nice people. And they were sending a message to anyone else that Republicans aren't welcome here.
Why did Professor Freeburg's colleagues treat her so poorly? Well, maybe they can't help it. Maybe it's just a natural result of spending so many years in a monoculture. There's no other way to describe what campuses have become. In a survey of faculty in the humanities and social sciences, Dan Klein found that for every 7 professors who were registered Democrats, there was only 1 Republican. And in certain departments, the ratio was a staggering 30-to-1.
The numbers are shocking. Practically all the professors are leftist. It's only among the older people that you get some Republicans, and those people are exiting soonest. The ratio is going to become more skewed before it becomes less. It's really extreme.
Stanley Rothman conducted a similar study. Nationwide, 72% of the professors he surveyed said they were left of center, compared to just 15% on the other side.
It's overwhelming. Faculties are to the left, overwhelmingly. More so than I anticipated.
This is hardly a marketplace of ideas. This is a monopoly. It's one size fits all. You get up, you get yours, next.
When people come around and say, well, you're all the same political views, I joke and say, no, in my department we have a Republican, which is true. We may actually have 2. He may not have revealed his views, but one of them I know is a Republican, and we've always had a Republican, except for a couple of years. I don't know if we've ever had 3.
Going to a university today in the United States is like joining a church. You have to be a believer. You have to have the right set of views, or if you don't, you're excluded.
I was attacked for teaching fields that are perceived as conservative. U.S. political history, U.S. diplomatic history, and U.S. constitutional history. They say, oh, you're teaching about dead white males. And to a certain extent, that criticism was correct. And it's one of the reasons why social history as a field and African American history and women's history originated. But what we've seen in the last decade or decade and a half, as these newer social historians have become powerful within departments, is that they have turned around and said simply anyone in the department teaching about politics or diplomacy is old-fashioned and we ought not to have this approach. Teaching about the history of the American government is somehow inappropriate because these are the exploiters. This encourages racist or sexist sentiments, and therefore it is a positive good to the college to purge these sorts of topics from the curriculum.
He's a Democrat. He's a liberal Democrat, and he comes from a family of liberal Democrats. Yet, he was characterized